It's a strange feeling when the people closest to you don't seem excited about your growth. You expect encouragement, maybe even pride, but instead you're met with hesitation, doubt, or silence. And over time, you start questioning yourself. Maybe I'm asking for too much. Maybe I should slow down. But the truth is, it's not always about you. Sometimes your desire to grow makes others uncomfortable in ways they don't even fully understand. When you begin to think bigger, act differently, or chase something beyond the usual path, it disrupts the emotional balance around you. People get used to who you've always been. They build a version of you in their minds, predictable, familiar, safe. And the moment you step outside of that version, it creates tension. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're doing something unfamiliar. For many people, comfort is everything. They build their lives around routines, beliefs, and limitations that feel secure. So when they see someone close to them pushing beyond those limits, it can feel threatening. Not in an obvious or aggressive way, but quietly, internally. Your growth becomes a reminder of risks they didn't take, chances they avoided, or dreams they let go of. And instead of confronting those feelings, it's easier for them to question your path. You might hear things like, why don't you just stay where you are? Or be realistic, or don't aim too high. On the surface, it sounds like concern, and sometimes it is, but other times it's rooted in fear. Their fear, not yours. Fear of change, fear of uncertainty, fear of seeing someone else break through boundaries they never dared to cross. The difficult part is that this doesn't always come from negativity or bad intentions. It often comes from people who genuinely care about you. They want you to be safe. They want you to avoid failure or disappointment. But in trying to protect you, they unknowingly limit you. They encourage you to stay in a space where everything is controlled and predictable, even if that space is too small for who you're becoming. Over time, this can make you feel torn. Part of you wants to grow, explore, and become more, but another part of you feels guilty for wanting more than what's expected. You might feel like you're leaving others behind or creating distance. And that internal conflict can be heavy. It can slow you down, make you second guess your decisions, or even push you to shrink yourself just to maintain peace. But growth was never meant to be comfortable, not for you and not for the people watching you change. When you evolve, it naturally shifts relationships, expectations, and dynamics. That doesn't mean you're wrong, it means you're moving. The key is understanding that not everyone will grow at the same pace or in the same direction, and that's okay. You don't need permission to expand your life. You don't need approval to follow your vision. The discomfort you feel from others is often a reflection of their own limits, not a measure of your potential. So instead of shrinking yourself to fit into old expectations, you have to stand firm in who you're becoming. Respect where others are, but don't let it define where you're going, because sometimes the hardest part of growth isn't the journey itself. It's accepting that not everyone around you will understand it. It's not always easy to recognize when care begins to feel heavy. At first, it looks like concern, questions about your choices, suggestions about what you should or shouldn't do, constant reminders to stay safe. It can even feel comforting, knowing someone is watching out for you. But over time, something shifts. The same concern that once felt supportive starts to feel restrictive, like invisible hands gently steering you away from the life you actually want. This is where confusion begins, because how do you question something that comes wrapped in love? How do you push back without feeling ungrateful? You tell yourself they mean well, that they're only trying to help, and maybe they are. But good intentions don't always lead to healthy outcomes. Sometimes what feels like love on the surface carries an undercurrent of control beneath it. It often shows up in subtle ways, not direct commands, but gentle discouragement, not harsh criticism, but quiet doubt. You might share an idea, something that excites you, and instead of encouragement, you hear hesitation. Are you sure that's a good idea? Or that sounds risky. It's never aggressive enough to confront, but it's consistent enough to make you question yourself. Slowly, your confidence starts to bend under the weight of their words. What makes it more complicated is that this kind of control rarely looks intentional. The people doing it may not even realize it. They believe they're protecting you from failure, from pain, from making the wrong choices. But in trying to protect you, they begin to shape your decisions. They create a space where your independence feels risky and staying close to their expectations feels safe. Over time, you may start filtering yourself. You think twice before sharing your plans. You adjust your goals so they sound more acceptable. You hold back parts of your ambition just to avoid uncomfortable conversations. And without realizing it, you begin to shrink. Not because you lack potential, but because you've been conditioned to stay within certain boundaries. There's also a deeper emotional layer to this. When love feels tied to approval, it creates pressure. You start believing that being accepted means being agreeable, that being loved means staying aligned with what others want for you. And that belief can be limiting, because real growth often requires you to make choices that not everyone will understand or support. The hardest part is realizing that you can care about someone deeply and still need space from their influence. You can appreciate their concern and still choose a different path. It doesn't make you disrespectful, it makes you aware. It means you're beginning to separate your identity from their expectations. Learning to recognize this dynamic is important, not to create conflict, but to create clarity. When you understand the difference between support and subtle control, you begin to trust yourself more. You stop looking for constant validation and you start listening to your own instincts. You don't have to reject people to reclaim your direction, but you do have to set quiet boundaries within yourself. You have to decide that your life is yours to shape, even if it makes others uncomfortable, because at the end of the day, love should feel like space, not pressure. It should encourage growth, not quietly limit it. And once you begin to see that clearly, something changes. You stop shrinking to maintain peace. You start expanding, even if it means redefining what support looks like in your life. There comes a quiet moment in your life when you realize you're not the same person anymore. Your thoughts have changed, your priorities feel different, and the things that once satisfied you no longer do. You start wanting more growth, more purpose, more direction. And while that shift feels right inside you, it doesn't always feel comfortable in your relationships. As you begin to move forward, something subtle starts to happen. The people around you may not say it directly, but you can feel a distance forming. Conversations don't flow the same way. Your goals don't align like they used to. The things that excite you might not interest them anymore. It's not always conflict. It's more like a quiet disconnect that slowly grows over time. This is where things become emotionally complicated because you're not trying to leave anyone behind. You're simply trying to move ahead. But to others, your growth can feel like separation. It can look like you're choosing a different path that doesn't include them in the same way as before. And for some people, that feeling is uncomfortable enough that they react not always with anger, but with resistance. You might notice it in small ways. They question your decisions more often. They remind you of how things used to be. They suggest you slow down or stay where you are. It can sound like concern, but underneath it, there's often a deeper emotion. Fear. Not necessarily fear of you, but fear of losing the version of you they've always known. People get attached to familiarity. They build connections based on shared routines, shared mindsets, and shared comfort zones. So when one person starts to evolve, it disrupts that balance. It creates a gap that not everyone knows how to handle. And instead of adjusting to that change, some people try to close the gap by pulling you back to where you were. The difficult part is that this can make you feel guilty. You start wondering if you're changing too much, too fast. You question whether your growth is worth the emotional distance it's creating. You might even feel responsible for maintaining the connection, even if it means holding yourself back. But growth doesn't work that way. It doesn't wait for everyone to be ready. It doesn't pause to keep things comfortable. It moves forward, whether others follow or not. And that doesn't make you selfish. It makes you honest about who you're becoming. Not everyone will be able to grow with you, and that's one of the hardest truths to accept. It doesn't mean they don't care about you. It just means they're on a different path, moving at a different pace with different priorities. And sometimes those paths naturally create distance. What matters is how you respond to that distance. You don't need to cut people off or create unnecessary conflict, but you do need to stay true to your direction. You have to accept that evolving may change your relationships, and that's part of the process. The right people won't need you to shrink to stay connected. They will adjust, support, or at least respect your journey, even if they don't fully understand it. And for those who can't, it's not your responsibility to stay the same just to keep them comfortable. Because at the end of the day, growth isn't about leaving people behind. It's about not leaving yourself behind. There's a quiet tension that can exist in places where you expect nothing but support. You achieve something, take a step forward, or simply begin to carry yourself with more confidence. And instead of pure encouragement, the reactions feel mixed. Not openly negative, not clearly hostile, but not fully happy either. It's subtle, almost invisible, but you feel it. It often starts with comparison, not always spoken out loud, but present in tone, body language, or small remarks. Someone might downplay your progress, shift the conversation to themselves, or respond with a kind of forced acknowledgement that lacks real warmth, and you're left wondering why something positive feels so complicated. The truth is, in some relationships, success changes the emotional balance, especially in environments where people are used to being on the same level, doing similar things, or sharing the same struggles. When one person begins to move ahead, it can unintentionally create a sense of imbalance. And instead of celebrating that shift, some people begin to measure it. This isn't always about jealousy in the obvious sense. It's deeper than that. It's about identity, self-worth, and unspoken expectations. When someone close to you sees you grow, it can trigger their own internal questions. What am I doing with my life? Why haven't I taken those steps? Am I falling behind? These thoughts are uncomfortable, and not everyone is willing to face them directly. So instead, they cope in quieter ways. They compare your journey to theirs. They look for flaws in your progress. They minimize your achievements or frame them as luck, timing, or external help, not because they want to harm you, but because it helps them protect their own sense of stability. You might notice that your wins are met with silence or quickly brushed aside. You might feel like you have to downplay your own success just to keep things comfortable. Over time, this creates a strange dynamic where you begin to shrink your light, not out of humility, but out of caution. And that's where it becomes a problem, because you shouldn't have to hide your growth to maintain peace. You shouldn't feel guilty for evolving, achieving, or becoming more confident in who you are. Real support doesn't feel like competition. It doesn't require you to dim yourself so others can feel secure. At the same time, it's important to understand that this behavior often comes from insecurity, not malice. People don't always know how to celebrate what they haven't experienced themselves. They don't always know how to respond when someone close to them breaks out of a shared pattern. And instead of expressing vulnerability, they protect themselves through comparison. Recognizing this can help you respond with awareness instead of frustration. You don't need to prove yourself, argue, or seek validation from those who can't fully give it. You simply continue your path, grounded in your own sense of purpose. You can still be kind, still be respectful, but without minimizing who you are. You learn to share your wins with people who genuinely celebrate them and to hold your confidence steady even when others feel unsettled by it. Because in the end, your growth is not a competition, it's a personal journey. And the people who truly support you won't feel threatened by your light, they'll feel inspired by it. There are expectations in every family that are never spoken out loud, yet everyone somehow understands them. You're expected to behave a certain way, follow a familiar path, make choices that feel acceptable, and stay within a version of life that keeps everything stable. No one sits you down and explains these rules, but you feel them in reactions, in silence, in approval, and in disappointment. For a long time, you may not even question it. You move along with what's expected because it feels normal. It keeps the peace. It avoids conflict. And in many ways, it gives you a sense of belonging. But then something shifts. You begin to think differently. You start wanting a life that doesn't fully fit within those unspoken boundaries. And that's when things start to change. The moment you choose a different direction, even in small ways, it disrupts that silent understanding. It can be something as simple as making an unconventional career choice, setting boundaries, or refusing to follow traditions that don't align with you anymore. To you, it feels like growth, but to others, it can feel like rejection. This is where the tension begins, not always through arguments or confrontation, but through subtle shifts in behavior. You might notice disapproval in small comments, distance in conversations, or a lack of support where you expected it most. It's confusing because you're not trying to hurt anyone. You're simply trying to live in a way that feels true to you. What makes this especially difficult is the emotional weight attached to it. You're not just making independent choices, you're stepping outside of a system that once defined your place in the family, and that can come with guilt. You may feel like you're breaking something, like you're being disloyal, even when you know deep down that you're doing what's right for your own life. But the truth is, growth often requires you to challenge these unspoken expectations, not out of rebellion, but out of honesty. You can't fully become who you're meant to be if you're constantly shaping yourself to fit a mold that no longer reflects you. And while it might create discomfort, it also creates space for a more authentic version of yourself to exist. It's important to understand that people may react strongly to this shift, not because they don't care about you, but because change is unsettling. When you step outside the familiar pattern, it forces others to face that the pattern itself is not permanent, and not everyone is ready to accept that. Some may try to pull you back, not through force, but through emotional pressure. They may remind you of how things used to be, question your decisions, or make you feel like you're drifting away. And for a moment, you might consider going back just to restore that sense of normalcy. But real growth doesn't work like that. Once you've seen beyond those limitations, it's hard to unsee them. You realize that staying the same just to maintain comfort comes at the cost of your own authenticity. So you learn to stand in your choices, even when they're misunderstood. You learn to accept that not everyone will agree with your path, and that's okay. You don't need to break relationships to move forward, but you do need to release the need for constant approval. Because at the end of the day, your life is not meant to be lived according to silent agreements you never consciously made. It's meant to be shaped by your own awareness, your own values, and your own direction. And sometimes honoring that means being willing to walk a path that others didn't expect, but one that finally feels like your own.